Good day to you, I'm Ryan, and I love me some delicious loot-giving action RPGs. The rush of getting a great piece of loot, the hordes of enemies and in-depth character customization are my favourite parts of the genre, but while I'm a huge fan of these types of games, I've only ever played the progenitor of the genre once as a kid. Until recently, that is. Diablo is the undisputed godfather of action RPGs, but while Diablo 2 pioneered many of the genre staples, what of its 1996 prequel? Today, we're going to take a look at the original Diablo game along with its Hellfire expansion and the troubled development of this ARPG legend. To understand the history of the original Diablo, I need to set the stage a little. The year is 1996 and gaming took its first steps into the world of 3D graphics. This was the year of Super Mario 64, Quake and the original Resident Evil. Just about every developer in the world was rushing to take advantage of this brand new 3D capable hardware, like the PlayStation 1, and for PCs, more powerful software like Direct3D and 3DFX graphics cards. Many 2D and isometric staples, especially on PC, were on the way out, although there was still a dedicated niche of 2D RPGs. Originally in development from a company called Condor Games, Diablo was pitched as a turn-based roguelike RPG with claymation graphics, and despite being pitched to a variety of publishers, they all turned it down purely on the basis that 2D isometric RPGs would get no traction on release. A chance meeting with an early Blizzard Entertainment would change this doomed course and bring about a genre-defining masterpiece, however. While the two companies decided to work together on bringing this game to life, Blizzard wanted to change things quite drastically from the original developer's vision, turning it into a real-time game as opposed to a turn-based one, and to remove the claymation aspect of the graphics. Despite heavy protests, a vote among the Condor team would turn things in Blizzard's favour. Reprogramming the game was a grueling process, but after seeing the action unfold on screen in real time, the team knew this was the right course of action, and that the game wouldn't just be good, historic. Blizzard was so impressed with how the game turned out that they acquired Condor Games and renamed them to Blizzard North, with the team working incredibly long days under a crunch to release the game in time for Christmas 1996, though they missed the deadline by only a few days. Seeing its first released on December 1st, 1996, gaming took its first steps into the dark and foreboding world of Diablo. In short, Diablo is the first traditional action RPG as we know the genre today. Set in the world of Sanctuary on the continent of Kandurus, the game sees a band of heroes, or just one if you're playing solo, descend into the depths of Tristram's cathedral to battle the rising evil bubbling up from within. While the heroes initially head below the cathedral to investigate the recent disappearances, a plot of deception and terror unfolds as the story reveals the true perpetrator of the events unfolding in Tristram, one of the three primevals of hell, Diablo, Lord of Terror. The actual gameplay of Diablo can't be simpler. You just click everywhere and everything to make your character move and attack enemies, pick up items and open chests or doors. The depth of the game comes from the RPG elements along with the item and enemy types. Being inspired by early RPGs, you can equip a variety of items to increase your power, with some being enchanted with random effects that can range from detrimental to game-breaking. With only 3 types of item rarity, the enchanted items are rarer than you'd expect, and with a randomization means it's a little tough to gear your character. Each floor of a dungeon feels like a new pinnacle that needs to be surmounted with a new tier of armor, resistances and damage, and while if you're careful you can take on all but the boss level challenges, if you're a little weaker than expected, you can quickly be overwhelmed as enemies swarm out of the darkness to surround you, or a door leads to a full room of enemies instead of just 1 or 2. Each monster kill gives EXP that levels you up, with each level giving you 5 points that can be allocated to any of the game's stats. Strength increases melee damage, dexterity increases the chance to hit and defend, magic increases mana, and vitality increases HP. Both strength and dexterity can be required to equip certain items, while magic is needed to learn spells from books and cast them from scrolls. The monsters themselves can range from absolute tanks to complete cannon fodder, with each monster type having unique resistances. This can be quite a pain though if your strongest attack is fire-based and enemy is resistant to fire, which during my mage playthrough meant I had to melee some enemies to death, but since I put all my points into magic meant I had neither a decent weapon or a good hit chance, I ended up spamming melee attacks while guzzling potions for up to 10 minutes on certain enemies. The boss enemies especially can be nightmares depending on their random effects, with magic resistant enemies being the literal death of magic characters. Thankfully, with enough luck you can find items that give you bonuses to stats, letting wizards equip much needed melee gear for those encounters, even if they won't actually be much good when swinging at the monsters. For a mage as well, you live and die by the availability of mana shield since you have very little health and armor. Oh, and by the way, the shop stock is randomised, and the only time I actually saw mana shield for sale from Asia was literally right at the start of the game and never again in the whole playthrough. Book of Mana Shield is 16,000, frickin' hell dude. While I could get through the whole game with a little difficulty here and there, it did mean I had to cheese the Diablo encounter with town portals and a massive amount of potions. He's also cheesing. To be fair, he is cheesing pretty hard. but he also the Lord of Destruction, so it's kind of fair on his behalf. Either way, thanks to Roland for giving me that strategy, you actually saved the run. To be honest, while these moments were frustrating and did detract from the game a little bit for me, they were very few and far between, and I imagine if playing a warrior or rogue you might have an easier time as fewer enemies are resistant to physical damage than magic damage. If you're a wizard, just be prepared to double dip in fire and lightning, and make sure you have some utility spells like Stone Curse or Golem. Being able to turn most enemies into stone lets you get those much needed melee hits on them, or the Golem can do the damage for you. But again, this depends on the random availability on those spells from either dungeons or Adria's shop. Make sure you have a good stash of gold at all times, by the way. You never know when you'll find that spell or item you need. The game has 3 classes, or 4 for the Hellfire expansion: the Warrior, Monk, Rogue and Sorcerer, with the Monk being added in Hellfire. Each has different starting stats and has a unique skill to use, like the Warrior's ability to repair items on the fly, or the Sorcerer being able to recharge magical staves. Each of the classes can wear every armor, use every weapon and learn every spell, as long as you have the right stats to use. You could totally start out as a sorcerer and be a melee-based character with a few spells if you wanted. It's worth mentioning though that if you do want to have a character who's good at both magic and melee, the rogue or monk are the best starting classes. Each of the classes also has a slightly different gain from stats. Warriors get 2 life per vitality, while wizards get 2 mana per magic. Rogues and monks get 1.5 health from vitality and 1.5 mana from magic. The graphics are wonderfully gritty and grainy, with the heavy use of pre-rendered 3D models used as 2D sprites, giving the monsters and characters a delightfully uncanny appearance. Being an early PC game, the game was actually limited to the amount of colours it could display at once, leading to the developers creating their own custom colour palette of darker tones. The dungeons are dark and dreary with limited lighting, helping to mask the low definition when in dungeons. It uses an early form of lighting called the 16-step system. This would use mathematics to determine how far things were from a light source, assigning a darker colour the further things were away, square by square, until they were in pure darkness. While this game pioneered the loot hunting isometric action that the genre is known for, the game is on a much smaller scale. The music in this game is nothing short of legendary. The iconic Tristram theme has appeared in every Diablo game since, but personally I think the droning dungeon ambiences are my favourite. The dungeon music has an oppressive tone that really sets the stage for a descent into hell. Initially more musical in the earlier stages, the music becomes more ambient the further down you go, each new dungeon type getting its own theme that suits it perfectly. With an emphasis on dissonance rather than more pleasing musical melodies, the soundtrack for the dungeon leaves you tense and on edge as you descend further down. As the game was originally supposed to be a turn-based game, it's set on a grid-based movement system, which limits your movement quite substantially compared to modern ARPGs, though it can lead to some tactical blocking of doors and small corridors, though enemies can box you in just as easily. The pace is also deliciously slow, matching the feeling of carefully trudging through derelict catacombs and actual hell, attempting to survive the onslaught of evil while trying desperately to save the townsfolk, as opposed to the horde-clearing pure action of Diablo 2 and beyond. In fact, the game feels a lot more like a horror game than an action game. The game's dark tone is wonderfully established from the ambient audio and ominous droning music, the gritty graphics and true darkness of the environments, along with the hopelessness of the game's story. While modern ARPGs both look and play much better, even having their own takes on creepy and dreary dungeons with ample amounts of grittiness in their design, I feel that they've lost the pure atmosphere that Diablo 1 established, and no matter how many ARPGs I play, nothing quite matches the vibe that this game so masterfully created. It's a perfect amalgamation of terror from start to finish and holds up so well despite being a slower paced game. Perhaps being a slower paced game is what really ties everything together. I feel that when you can glide through the environment slaying enemies with ease, you start to lose appreciation for the smaller things found along the way. Being so focused on storming through the levels and getting that next upgrade means that you never have the opportunity to appreciate the environments, even though they technically look much better now than Diablo 1's levels. The original Diablo saw a huge amount of success when it first released. Blizzard's parent company demanded an expansion pack release for it straight away to capitalize on its success, but the team was burnt out on Diablo 1 at this point and wanted to shift their full attention over to the sequel, Diablo 2. Unhappy with their rejection of the idea, Blizzard's parent company actually outsourced the expansion pack to a third-party team called Synergistic Software, with Sierra receiving the publishing rights to it. Blizzard famously hated this decision as they didn't want their established lore, atmosphere and gameplay to be shattered, especially as Diablo 2 was well under production at this point. This caused the development of the expansion Hellfire to be incredibly chaotic, as with a tight deadline and hardly any cooperation from Blizzard, Synergistic had to build not only new levels to explore but also extra classes. As well as having restrictions over what they could tinker with, many of the ideas for the expansion were hated and shot down by Blizzard, who at this point hated the idea of cooperating with another company on a franchise they were making a sequel for, especially as much of the proposed content would have been in the sequel. When Hellfire was finally released, it was essentially disowned by Blizzard, who called the events of the expansion non-canon to the storyline of Diablo and took away the online Battle.net support, as they didn't want to be responsible for another company breaking their online code. Being left out of bundles and re-releases, the Hellfire expansion was a bizarre piece of Diablo history that many forgot, until it was finally released on GOG in 2019. So what does the Hellfire expansion actually add? Well, it's a little bit of a disappointing assortment of additions that add nothing too meaningful to the game or story, with the addition of a new class called the Monk who specialises in strength and dexterity with the use of staves, and 2 new dungeon types called the Nest and the Crypt. The Nest is a bizarre bug hive filled with acid pools and pods, with many of the enemies being insectoids, while the Crypt is a bizarre tomb filled with incredibly tough enemies, but honestly I had a very hard time progressing through. Other additions include new spells, trap runes and oils that can increase the power of weapons. They also added some quality of life features, like the search spell that highlights items on the ground and an increased movement speed in town. This guy is practically zooming across the map. To rebel against the restrictions imposed on them a little bit, Synergistic included some of the cut content in the game anyway, though you can only access these secrets by dropping a specific file called command.txt to the game directory that would unveil the content along with the hidden bard and barbarian classes. Despite having some good features, the Hellfire expansion is so drastically different in tone from the main game, it has a jarring feeling when moving from the base game to the expansion content. Looking back at Diablo 1, it's an incredibly atmospheric game but really sets the tone of being in a grim, demon-infested world that, despite the imminent doom, has a glimmer of hope. It's a wonderful experience that holds up surprisingly well thanks to the grim vibe and slower paced, more methodical gameplay. It really goes to show that amazing games can be made without relying on the most modern graphics, as its 2D isometric style, while a little grainy, still holds up quite well when compared to early 3D games. It's amazing to take a look at not only the origins of Diablo, but also the origins of the ARPG genre, as while things have gotten undeniably faster and more action-oriented, the sheer joy of going through some dungeons, battling weird monsters and finally getting that piece of loot you've been needing is absolutely timeless. Thanks for joining me as I took a look back at Diablo and the Hellfire expansion. What was your first Diablo game? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching, and take it easy.